So you've committed to space and now, doing it again elsewhere. We'll talk more about that. You've committed to a team, and that's where we are today with Gray and Patina. What's next?
That's a good question.
Cut. We need time.
No, this is a conversation that happens quite a lot. We've got this new multivitamin that we're going to launch.
I need it.
Honestly, I think you have huge publications like Hodinkee that are doing, they're so influential. I mean, they're the 800-pound gorilla in the space of telling these watch stories. I don't think the watch industry would be where it is without their influence. But I think there are areas where we can really focus on, for us, it's obviously vintage, right? I don't think you're going to get us covering the new ceramic Coke GMT that launches next year.
What? You heard it here first.
But it's, we're going to continue talking about the things we're passionate about. And a lot of the ethos videos that you've come to see, they have really nothing to do with watches, but at the same time, everything to do with watches.
Right.
Because I don't think necessarily what you're buying when you're buying a vintage Rolex or a vintage Patek or Omega, that you're buying a watch per se. That piece of metal has changed because who owned it, the time it's spent in the environment, it's definitely not shiny and new like a lot of things. And the type of person that's looking for that is also cut from a little bit of a different cloth than your typical watch enthusiast. And I know that if you're looking at a Venn diagram, yes, you have modern collectors as well as there are also sometimes vintage collectors. So yeah, I have no idea where you were asking, but I was just kind of free flowing there.
No, so for me, your past is pretty well documented.
Mm-hmm.
At least the parts of it that you want to have documented are. There's other parts that we're going to try and dig into later. But the present, I mean, that's pretty clear too. People can just go online and see what you're up to, really. But I always have this sense that there's more to come. And when I say more, I don't mean more watches. The reality is watches are pretty much watches, but more from Gray and Patina.
I don't know what Maynard's been whispering in your ear, but I'm not privy to what is coming up per se. I mean, for us, the biggest news for this year is our satellite office up in Napa. And that's selfishly, for me, I'm originally from San Francisco. And to find and get back to my roots there was always one of the goals. And if I could evangelize and bring Gray and Patina up there as well, I'd kill two birds with one stone. I think there is a lot to be said about a city or county where they depend on a resource that comes from nature, takes craftsmen, many months, if not years, to cultivate and build. And I think that story is just resonates very, very closely with our own story. Obviously, very, very different products, but at the same time, once again, I think there's a lot of overlap in the people that are visiting Napa to consume wine, to find wine, to understand viticulture. Like, this is almost the same language as vintage watches. So hopefully we have an audience there. I know we have some clientele out there, but
sure.
If not for anything, it would just be an excuse for us to go out and drink some great wine.
And drink wine.
Yeah.
In a nice place.
Why not?
So obviously I've got a connection to the watch community, and I know that community has always been important to you and to Gray and Patina, and maybe you could talk for a few minutes to that. You've got your own community here at Gray and Patina.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit.
So, one of the first watch get-togethers that we participated in was that second OC Chrono event. I think shout out to Discom and Neil for hosting us that event. But from that event, I think, great hobbies you can enjoy in a vacuum. Like, it's a hobby of one. You can appreciate wine, you can have a cigar by yourself and really get into it. But it's amplified. It's definitely amplified when you find like-minded individuals especially not just to kind of share what you have, but to absorb and see what is getting other people excited. For us, cultivating that community comes naturally in the sense that we are building relationships every time we sell a watch, every time we receive an inquiry or a question. And we've met so many great individuals, way different backgrounds. But at the same time, it's like we find this common ground to discuss our passion. And often that leads to like conversations. I remember at the first OC Chrono event, I barely talked about watches. I talked about cameras because I brought my Leica up there, and I saw other people with Leicas, and I'm like, oh, okay, let's shoot the crap about film bodies and whatnot.
Right.
But it's a gateway, right? It's just one. What I love about these watches is you see someone at the airport, and they're wearing a vintage Pepsi. It would not be weird to ask them, where they got their watch.
Right.
Because more often than not, they have an interesting story. They purchased from an AD, maybe you know them, or maybe they inherited it from their father, and that could be a similar story. You can find common ground and a lot of commonality. And it's one of those things that it's such a rare occurrence, because that doesn't happen to me very often. And I think it's a very different approach to wearing like a brand new ceramic Daytona, where the reason you might wear one is not necessarily the reason why someone would wear a vintage Daytona.
Right.
I feel like collecting vintage is a bit more intrinsic in the sense that I don't want anyone to notice. But if you do notice, then let's have a conversation, because I want to know why you know this, right? That's the thing. Whereas I think a lot of modern watches, and this is not me shitting on modern, I definitely appreciate modern watches as well, but sometimes I could ask, oh, where'd you pick up your Kermit? Your ceramic Kermit, and you're like, oh yeah, my AD just called me or whatever.
Right.
It's just like, okay, that's
I got the call. That's the whole story right there.
I bought 20 Cellinis, and now I own a proud owner of a ceramic Kermit.
Right.
So no, these touch points, they're very under the radar, but at the same time, well, I say under the radar, and I've worn this today. This is
that is so not under the radar.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe someone would ask me why I'm wearing this. Yeah, but at the same time, like what you brought in, this is a recent acquisition, right?
Yes.
Yeah, iconic in design, and of course, anyone that sees this, the red and blue bezel, they're like GMT. But for the person's like, oh, chapter ring, okay, 61, 62, what year, what is this? But yeah, I think that's the fun part of it.
Yeah. I agree. That's been fun for me. I just came from a meeting with a few watch people, and it's always interesting to
friends?
me. No, I said watch people.
Oh,
They're
okay.
none of them my friends.
Got it. Okay.
No, they wouldn't have me. And it's always interesting when the watch family gets together to see what shows up, and you can kind of tell a lot about each person, from.
Oh, I'm so judgmental.
From what's
watch
on
meets.
their wrist, right?
Yes.
And so it's just fun, those conversations, because person over here talks about their ceramic Daytona, the person over here talks about their AP, and we go around, and you show a watch like this, and there's an understated power to
superiority, right? You just feel like
yeah. Well, my mom told me I was pretty special.
You are special.
No, it's just an interesting dynamic, because the watch speaks for you so often in the watch world. Out in the regular world, it's a very different thing, but in the watch world, the watch speaks for us a lot of times. And so these vintage, these vintage watches that we all are so attracted to, just say so much, and they're all one of one. Mm-hmm. And I always find that to be probably the greatest testimony to what we're doing.
You ever see those vintage VR vintage Rolex Hong Kong get-togethers?
Yes.
Where they have
insane.
like 30 Paul Newmans on the table.
It's insane.
But there is no mistaking which Paul Newmans belong to which person. It's like everything is they are the same, but they're very, very different. And for the owner, they know exactly which
Right.
one their piece is, and that's just really cool.
I love that about that. It's almost like your own kid. You know, you could have 20 kids in the room, and let's hope you know which one's yours.
Oh, I didn't bring a kid.
Well, that's another conversation.
There's a leftover there.
That's another conversation, for sure. So, the watch market, you know, vintage or otherwise,
Yeah.
but we'll talk about vintage a little bit today. Like so many other aspects of our world, has changed so dynamically in such a short period of time. You know, and I'm not just talking about, you know, the whole, you know, movement of collecting watches in general. I'm talking about what's happened in the last 12 months, 18 months, maybe 24 months, but really in a really compressed time frame with respect to availability, pricing, what people are interested in, those kinds of things. And we don't really need to get too deep into that. But what do you and what does Gray and Patina, if you kind of look in your crystal ball 6 months out, what do you think people are going to be looking for in the vintage watch space? Price we've got no control over. We you know, who knows, right? But
Yeah.
but what types of things are you starting to see emerge as more important than they were before, and maybe growing to be, you know, as important to us all as the GMTs of the world and the subs and all these other things?
Sure. I think the main staple of sports Rolexes, sports Patek, those are always going to be pretty much solid throughout, right?
Sure.
You're not going to get too much variance in popularity between those models. People are always chasing those 40 millimeter, 36 millimeter watches. And it seems to me that, you know, the trend now, like I think Hodinkee posted this, you know, Rihanna was wearing a King Midas.
Yep.
And yes, it was kind of customized, but man, was that cool.
Super cool.
And I'm glad that, you know, you don't have to wear, if you're some emerging artist, you know, athlete, whatever, you don't have to wear a Nautilus. I know this is like really far right and far like thinking
I kind of
extremist.
felt the ground shift when you said that, yeah.
You don't have to have a Nautilus. There's a lot of different watches. You don't have to have a Daytona. And I think it speaks volumes, like finding the weird and eclectic type of stuff. Now, are those watches going to be easy to move and as liquid as a Daytona?
Sure.
Probably not.
Right.
But I think if your mindset is thinking, okay, I want to buy this watch and flip it in a year, not really collecting, you're flipping.
Right.
So, but if you're talking about collecting, you're going to be looking for pieces that have meaning, and there's a lot of great pieces out there that nobody's looking at right now. I'm not going to tell you what they are. Probably give you some hints earlier on, but I think those are going to be fun because they're affordable. You're different, and if you can find a story and that resonates with you, then I think that's what you should get into.
So you're really not going to tell us?
Well, I mean, I don't want to pay double. You know, like, can you imagine that John Mayer Hodinkee watch, the green dial?
Yeah, yeah.
When he first announced it, when he was like, "Yeah, this is
The next thing.
yeah," I'm not in any way comparing myself to John Mayer. I'm just saying, like, how crazy is that watch is now, you know, a six-figure watch.
Sure. Because of one guy and one video.
I mean, obviously, he's a very, very famous guy, but
But he's still one guy in one video.
one guy, one video. I mean, that's just the way it is now, right? I mean, anything that is Daytona related, and if it's arguably special in some way, shape, or form, that's what I think everyone's looking for. And I tend to run away from, you know, what everyone is trying to chase.
Yeah. Is there any part of the market, vintage or otherwise, that you feel just from a expense standpoint, from a, you know, does this make sense standpoint, should be avoided right now? Is there anything, I mean, I get it. I mean, your advice has always been buy what you like, you know, do that. And that's great advice and it's honest advice. But, you know, from a pricing standpoint, is there anything that's just gotten ridiculous relative to what the real value is, in your opinion?
And generalizing across all manufacturers, I think there's still tremendous value in precious metals. You're seeing steel variants of the same watch almost trade at maybe 10% less in value comparison to their precious metal watches.
Yep.
For example, we've carried a couple of the gold AP Owl watches,
Right.
Moonphase, Royal Oaks, and the steel counterparts are right up there with their gold counterpart. And I get it, right? Like, so you want something that is, neutral in color, yes, fine. But when you wear a gold AP Royal Oak vintage, man, there's nothing, that's not much close to it. But yeah, that's not to say that the steel ones aren't worth what they're worth.
Right.
I just think that the precious metal ones are undervalued for what they are.
Sure.
So outside of that realm, nothing really in the sense that where you shouldn't park your money. It almost seems like you'd be stupid to hold on to money right now because everything is just going more and more expensive. I don't think you can make any mistakes. We talked about this earlier in modern. Because the next week it's $1,000 up, and even if you're buying higher, buying wrong, give it a couple weeks, and you're up. That to me is a little bit scary, and it's part of the reason why I'm not necessarily getting into modern, because one, it's not really our passion. We don't have an immense knowledge like some of the other dealers do, and to me it's not as fun. And if I'm going to bust my ass and our team is going to do everything they can to build stories, we want to do something worth that has substance, that has a lot of meaning.